Thank you so much. We are joined by 7 of our board members, our superintendent of schools, Dr. Timothy P. Harney, our assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction, Mr. Robert Haas, our interim assistant superintendent for finance and operations, Mr. Luis Fronterio, our district legal counsel, Mr. Edward McCarthy, and as always, we have our district clerk, Ms. Suzanne Benetti. As always, there are 2 opportunities for the community to participate during the Board of Ed meeting. The first is just before the board takes up its agenda. The second follows disposition of all agenda items. If you would like to speak, we ask that you come to the podium. You must be a resident of the Bayport Blue Point School District. If not, you must be voted in by a majority vote of the Board of Ed. We ask you to keep those times, individual times, to 3 minutes. And for the convenience of the community, all of our Board of Ed meetings are live streamed and posted to Board Talks thereafter. And if you'd like to follow the school on Twitter, you can follow us at BBP Schools or Dr. Harney at BBP Soup. At this time, we open it up to any community members for new business. Not hearing any, we'll pass over to Dr. Harney. How are you tonight, sir?
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. I hope everyone is enjoying their summer. Just a couple of quick updates. Just a reminder, our next meeting is August 29th. In terms of important dates, staff will be back on Tuesday, September 5th. And students return on Thursday the 7th, so we have a superintendent's conference day on the 5th and the 6th, and then the students return on the 7th, just so people are aware. At our last meeting, I had talked about us changing over our website. That has happened. We are still making some changes to it, and we'll do a formal launch of it, but it is live right now, but just so people are aware, we're still continuously making changes to it. One of the questions have been asked is about the calendar tab. The calendar tab is back on it. The detailed calendar is not on it yet, but that's not unusual. We're doing a final review of that, and then that will be added to the website as well. So you have that. And then, as I mentioned at a previous meeting as well, we'll be updating, we'll be moving from Blackboard Connect to Aptogee Communication. So probably over the next couple of weeks, we'll start to test it a little bit. Just so that people are aware. Other than that, that is really all that I have. Enjoy the rest of your summers. Spend time with your family and friends. And then really what we have tonight is 2 presentations that Mr. Haas is going to give. One is regarding our AIS plan, and one is which we do annually and is board approved annually. And then the second piece is we had a policy recently revised, our attendance of policy. So Mr. Haas will do a quick overview of that as well. So with that, I'm going to move right to Mr. Haas. So we'll go from there.
Thank you, Dr. Harney. I also I hope everyone's having a nice summer so far. So the first policy that I want to present on tonight is the attendance policy, and this was a policy that was previously adopted by the Board of Education to go into effect for this school year. But I did want to present you just some of the highlights of it, take you through the background of it, and show you where some of the significant changes would be, because it is something that is going to be a different practice for the secondary level when it comes to how we address student attendance and how we work with those students and their families. So the attendance, just to give you a little bit of background information, this was a committee that was formed 2 years ago during the 21-22 school year, during that springtime, and it was headed up at the high school. It was headed up by our Dean of Students, Mr. Zafante, and he brought together a group that included myself, our assistant principal, Mr. Zarconi, members from the counseling staff, guidance counselors, social workers, and teachers as well were on the committee. And we spent that spring and then really last school year going through other district policies, consulting with our legal team as to what needs to be in a policy, what doesn't need to be in a policy, what we can do. Ultimately drafting, coming up with a draft policy that was then presented to faculty and staff. We elicited feedback from them and then made some adjustments based on the feedback that we received from them, and ultimately came to a policy that was presented or given to the Board of Education for adoption. So really, as the committee got together, there became two goals that came to light pretty quickly and early on during the committee's work. And that was, we wanted to focus on two things. It was communication with the families, and instead of having a policy that focused on punitive actions, we really wanted to focus on interventions for the students and supports that we could provide both the students and the families. And from that moment, once that decision was made, that became the driving force behind our committee and what we were looking at to do. So oftentimes you would hear of in our old policies, especially, it talked about denial of credit from classes. And while that can still exist within a policy and within our policy, it is not the focus of the policy. It really is some of the supports that can be put in place prior to that. So like I said, one of the main focuses was communication. So that first step, when we talk about communication, there really were two components of it. Number one, with any new policy and then ongoing from that this point forward, it's that opening of school year and how is this going to be communicated to students and communicated to families. So the first, obviously, it will be put onto our website. There will be a letter that is going home. I will be meeting with Mr. Nolan, Mr. Zarconi, Mrs. Afante, Mr. Andruskowitz, Ms. Westerland over the course of the next few weeks to go through putting that letter together and introducing the policy to the families. And then the schools will be meeting with the students early on in the school year within the first couple of weeks, and they will be presenting the information to them. So it will be electronically delivered to students as well through Google Classroom, but anyone who needs physical copies, like so many other things, it will be available upon request through the main offices. And then there's the other piece, and this really gets into a little bit of the meat of the policy, and that's the ongoing communication through attendance awareness letters that we've developed. And basically how that's going to work is every student at the secondary level on a 5-week interval beginning with week 5 of school, that family will receive a letter home with an update on that student's attendance, not only their daily attendance, but also their period-by-period attendance. And there will be information in there that describes what the attendance means, because you may find that period-by-period attendance differs from the daily, and that's because a student gets called out for music lessons or they get called to a guidance appointment. So that counts in your period-by-period, but we found it very important that parents and guardians are able to see, okay, you're struggling in math, and we see that you have 6 absences in math as opposed to you've only been absent from school once. Maybe you don't get called out for those. We try not to get called out from those periods. So it opens that line of communication there. It also helps celebrate the students who do have, their attendance is strong and they're proud of some students we have come through that, they make a point to tell us that they have perfect attendance, so it does also acknowledge that piece as well. Another component to the letter really will be printed on the reverse side of it, so it'll have the individual information for each student on the front side. On the reverse side will be the supports that are there for families. So this is something that we're going to be working with our counseling department and our school social workers to provide information to parents that is contact information, whether it's just the school counselors, the social worker, the psychologist, what their email, their phone number is, but then also some key resources out in the community that parents could utilize, whether it's in an emergency situation, a hotline that they could call, or a program such as DASH, which is located in Hauppauge that we've had success utilizing over the past few years. But some of those other resources that parents would be able to go to so that they know if they're having difficulty with their child getting them to school and having some attendance issues, that they'd be able to reach out to those resources along with reaching out to the school. So that's really the goal behind that. And those letters will go on a 5-week basis all the way through the month of May into that last marking quarter at the secondary level. So it really is to just keep bringing awareness to parents and guardians of this is what your child's attendance is, because there are a lot of times that we do have a conversation with a parent and they tell us, oh, I didn't realize my child was absent 25 times. So it's just continuing to bring that. And then there's the interventions. And while this would look similar to a traditional attendance policy, it's really some of the actions that start to differ. And what we did here is we looked at the absences on intervals of 6, so starting with 6 absences and going to 12, 18, and 24. And this is really focusing, at this point within the policy, we're focusing on the daily attendance, which really is considered 3 periods or more. So as you see, the key person in this process, and it was important that we did have Mr. Bard, our department chair for guidance, was involved. He was one of the committee members, is that the school counselor plays a key role. So once a student is identified as having 6 absences, and we run these reports will be run on that 5-week interval. At the 6th absence, the school counselor will meet with that student. The school counselor will also be in contact with the parents to discuss what's going on. And it could be that the student was absent 6 times because they wound up with the flu. And, you know, it's an easy explanation. They've made up their work. There's no problem. But it also could lead to conversation which they find something else out that they can help the student with. So at that time, they will also create an individualized attendance plan for the student, where they're going to set goals with the student of, okay, how can we correct this action? What can we do to help you as well? And then from there, it moves on to the 12th absence. And if a student does come back up on it, they've obviously already met once. Now we're going to involve a little bit more. We're going to involve the social worker in this. And now we're going to bring the parents or guardians will be coming in for a physical meeting with that staff, with the support staff, to then really start to talk about it even more as to what's going on, what can we do to help. And you can't put a prescribed plan in place because every child is going to be different. So from that meeting, plans hopefully will be developed for those students. Fast forward to an 18th absence where it then does kick up a notch, where you start to bring administration in, whether it's the assistant principal or dean of students. Hey, again, parent and guardian, social worker, psychologist if necessary, depending on who works with the student. And again, continuing to try and come up with interventions, providing plans for the family, working with them on an individual basis. And then ultimately, at the 24th absence, the principal, and that's whatever support staff is necessary, meeting with the student, meeting with the family, and then also bringing it to the building's EST, our educational support team, to then look at what are some of the options for that student. And this is where denial of credit could come into play, but there are certain legalities with denial of credit in terms of the student having to be failing a class in order to have credit denied. So it's really not the main focus, but it could also lead to, you know, things like Child Protective Services getting involved, summer school, and anything else that could be related that could help the family. So the idea behind it is starting with that communication piece, and then even with some of these interventions and supports, is really individualizing it to the student, to that family, and opening those lines of communication as much as possible. And really with the next steps is, obviously throughout the year, we're going to monitor and review the effectiveness or the implementation of the policy. I wouldn't say the effectiveness yet, and then make possible revisions and additions to that at that time. But another thing is also this practice really focuses on the secondary level. We've already spoken to the elementary schools as to starting to look at, is there something that we can put into place for the elementary schools that also are along these same lines of interventions and supports for the family, along with the communication. And then ultimately, my goal would be next year, at the end of this, the 23-24 school year, is the next presentation you'd see on the attendance policy is to look at the data from this year and compare it to years past, which I know it's difficult with attendance because of COVID over the past few years, but to start to compare the data and see, is this working? Do we find this to be effective? Is there things that we need to change from there? So I just, like I said, we wanted to bring some of the highlights of the policy to you, just to show you where some of the new ideas and implementations will be. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Thank you for presenting on this, and I just really love that it's moving away from punitive action and it's more about restoring and being proactive about it. I love the title, Attendance Awareness Letter, and that you're going to have a flip side to offer resources. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just on a side note, and Mr. Haas had spoken to it a little bit, is within the policy too, is this will become somewhat of a annual type of presentation, And it will be within the policy. It talks about sharing data that we collect from the schools regarding our daily attendance. And even it's something now that the state is collecting as well. So we'll do that. And then within it, if we're seeing major changes within the attendance, then we would look to obviously revise and take a look at the policy. But this will become, probably at this time of year, will become a yearly update for the Board of Education.
Any other trustees with questions? Mr. Haas, thank you so much.
Thank you. So now I will move on to the next presentation, which I believe is on the agenda tonight for our response to intervention and academic intervention services plan. So really, when developing this presentation to go along with the plan that is on the agenda this evening, I really wanted to just develop a common understanding of both response to intervention, or you hear me refer to it as, and more commonly referred to as RTI, and academic intervention services, or AIS, just by presenting an overview of both and how we utilize them within our district, and then again, what are some of our future goals with them. So like any one of our new programs or anything, we do take a look at our district goals, and these were adopted earlier this summer. And one of the things you can look at with RTI and AIS is that they really do touch upon all of the goals within our school district, from everything from learning to those resources that we can provide to provide the best experience for our students. So really to begin is looking at what is the difference. People oftentimes wonder, what is the difference between RTI and AIS? How do they get into, mingled with one another? And to break it down is when we look at RTI, we look at the process. This is how the district is going to go about determining through research-based instruction what are the areas that a student does need support and how much support we could provide them with. And then when you flip over to the AIS component, that's really our framework. That's the structure for which we can provide some of this support. And that will stretch all the way. The RTI is really, from the state standpoint, at the elementary level, where AIS does make its way through all the way to the high school. So when we look at RTI, and that's what we'll focus on first, the big thing that you'll always hear with RTI is that multi-tiered approach. And it is a multi-tiered problem-solving approach for general education students, for any student that really tries to break down where are some of the struggles happening, whether it's academic or behavior, and where are some of the areas that we can provide them with an intervention. And really the purpose is for a school-based team to get together and to design, implement, and then ultimately evaluate a plan for a student to meet each individual student's needs. And just like our attendance policy, it's really focused on what are the individual needs of that student and trying to provide for it. So when you hear that multi-tiered approach, hey, you hear about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 1 really encompasses almost your entire student body. 80 to 90% of students usually fall within tier 1, and this is done through universal screenings within the classroom. At the elementary level, we're utilizing iReady, where every student, and to the middle school level, we're using that. That's just one example, where every student is going through this screening and possibly being provided with supports by the classroom teacher that can go to all of them. Tier 2 is when you start to bring in some of that small group instruction. Also could take place within the classroom. Some additional time, some supplemental work for the students. And often this is done, we monitor that student through the progress monitoring. And then tier 3, smaller population, usually about 1 to 5% of the students. And this is individualized small group instruction, and it is much higher in intensity and frequency. This could involve students being pulled out or coming during that 0 period at the elementary level where they're being provided some direct support in that small group or as an individual. So the key group that comes into with RTI and then even with AIS, so I just wanted to highlight it, is our building's educational support teams. And a lot of districts call it, you'll oftentimes hear it referred to as the IST. In Bayport Blue Point, we call it the EST. But it is the same group, and it's made up of everything from administration, support services from psychologists, guidance counselors, social workers, general education teachers, special education teachers, and then also the people that could be a classroom teacher that could be referring a student to the educational support team could be a part of the committee at that time. And really the purpose going back to it is to look at multiple measures for that student. So not only standardized test scores, but also taking a look at the student's performance within the classroom, their behaviors within the classroom. Are they participating in the lessons? How are they doing on that? How are they interacting, working in groups with students? So taking a look at all of that and then being able to provide answers and supports for the classroom teachers. And then ultimately following up on that student as time goes on, whether it's at a 6-week interval or sometimes even a little bit longer, but following up for that student to come back and see, is this program that we designed for this student or the recommendations we gave, is this helping the student? Do we need to go a different route? Do we need to plan something different? So the EST, which meets in the buildings on a weekly basis, that is the group that is really the driving force behind that. And really their questions when they're approaching our ESTs is what is the problem, what is happening, what can be done about it, and then ultimately did it work when we come back and we review or reflect on for that student. So like I said, now we get into some of the framework and we talk about AIS and the academic intervention services. This is an additional instruction that's aimed at supplementing the instruction that's being provided within the general curriculum. And it's that additional support covers all subject areas. It can be English, whether it's writing or reading. It also is within math, science, and social studies. And this past year, we actually were able to expand during the 22-23 school year. We were able to expand our AIS supports. At the secondary level, we were able to expand the supports into science and social studies, which we hadn't had for many years. So there is a two-step process when you talk about AIS. There is a two-step process for identifying students for AIS. And if you go back traditionally when the program started some 15 to close to 20 years ago when AIS first began, it was strictly based off of state scores, and whether it was state assessments, region scores, when students were failing or falling below a certain benchmark, they were mandated to go into AIS. As the years have gone on, that's changed a little bit. And even for the next school year, we did receive a couple of weeks ago the memo from the state saying that assessment scores for this past year aren't going to be coming in until after the school year begins. So you don't have to just base it. They want multiple measures. They want that second step. And that second step is what we've been doing for years within our EST. And it's looking at those multiple measures. Is the student in danger of not having success on an assessment, not having success at the secondary level on a Regents exam? Okay. And looking at both classroom assessments, looking at all of that work that student is doing and reports from the teacher to then see what the recommendation can be made for the student. So when you look at, and this is within the plan, these are the different supports and interventions that we're able to provide for our students within the district. So on the K-5, you're seeing it AIS math, writing, reading, science, even work that's done within speech and language, counseling, and OT. And those are some of the different programs that we have. You see a lot within reading is obviously a main focus at the elementary level. And as you move into the secondary level, you start to see a little bit more where it is supporting the curriculum. Okay, and you see the AIS math, reading, science, social studies, and writing, and the same at the high school level. And like I said, we were able to expand at those two levels for the past, I would say, about 10 years. We did not have science and social studies. We were able to add those back in to our program to provide students for support in those areas as well. So when you look at some of those workshops, they're aligned with the curriculum and they're providing that additional support for the students in those areas. So again, when I look at this, especially starting new into this job, I start to look at, okay, what can we do with this? How do we move forward with it? What are our next steps? And this past school year, in the 22-23 year, there was a AIS committee that was created, a subcommittee out of Elementary Instructional Council that focused on the AIS supports that were provided at the elementary level. So that committee, I did start meeting, was able to meet with them at the end of the year, and Lisa Roach, who works over at Academy and chaired that committee, they were able to provide some recommendations coming into this year. So we're going to continue to look at those, but that committee is going to continue to meet this year. A goal is to then also create a secondary committee to really look at what our secondary offerings are going to be, just like the elementary. We want to continue to evaluate our plan, and really take a look and make sure, especially at the elementary level, are we aligned at each building? Are we providing the same supports? Is it equitable between our 3 buildings? But then really start to look at ways that we can evaluate the current interventions, and looking at student data, whether it's the group or the individual data, and be able to use that. It's something that we started doing. Mr. Zafante, as the math chair, started doing that at the high school level this year, taking a look at those students in the workshops. How did they do on the Regents exam? So starting to do that throughout everything to see the effectiveness of the program that we have. And then making recommendations for future years and seeing what, is there a restructuring or that we can do moving forward. So.
Thank you, Mr. Haas. Any questions from trustees?
In thinking about the plan in general for the middle school and secondary, how do you see that impacting scheduling for students on that level?
So right now at the middle school and secondary level, and it's a question we started talking about a lot this year, is how it really works now is it gets built into the schedule. So typically a support period, we call it a workshop, is an every other day class. So when you look at a student's schedule at the secondary level, that means if they're going into math workshop, something has to come out. So that does have to replace some type of elective. And when you start to look at students that maybe are receiving more than one AIS workshop, you start to see they're coming out of some of those classes that may be what's of interest to them, and not providing them with those opportunities. So we've even started conversations on creative scheduling. Is there a way of providing it in a different way that students can not miss out on those opportunities as well? So I don't have the direct answer for you, but it is something that we've started those conversations as to how can we do this differently? Is there a different way to look at it?
That's great.
One of the things, Mrs. Cerrone, that we did try this past year, I don't know if you recall that we did along with the 6th grade teachers and the administration at the middle school, we revised the 6th grade and how it was being delivered in terms of the scheduling, because that's where you really need to be the most creative. So currently I'm waiting on information from the middle school to see how that actually played out over the course of the year. And then is that something that we're able to maybe do in the other grades as well? And the idea was for it really to be more fluid. So it was easier to get in and out of the AIS, so to speak. And also at the same point, if there were students that needed enrichment from the other side, we were going to be providing that. So that was something we tried this year. So now we're just gathering all that so we can look at that to see, did it do what we had hoped to do? So we are trying to be creative in some of these things, but that just did happen this past year.
Thank you. And my second question was about, is there any plans with the committee about looking into like a social emotional screener for students?
It has, as I begin my work with the committee, I have to explore that question as well. I don't know.
Something that we've actually started to talk a little bit about in our SEL task force. So it didn't necessarily come up in the AIS group. It came up more as we have an SEL task force that's really been quite active, especially in the last year or so. That is something that has been discussed, but we have not decided on one either way. We were, as you know, we were working with Mr. Heimwitz last year, and he had a scale that we started to implement. We're trying to figure out, is that the scale that we want to go with? Because it was a daily scale. There's also an app to it. Or is there something else that we're looking at? So we're kind of looking around right now and doing more research.
And I will say, one of the things that did take place a little bit, that has taken place over the past few years within the building ESTs, is there has been more of just instead of it just being, okay, they're struggling in math, let's get them in math workshop, there has been more of having the guidance counselor involved with that student, having the social worker involved in that student. We even piloted a couple of years back at the middle school, and it has continued, and we actually we were able to try it a little bit at the high school this year, of where a student was provided with, we called it like a study hall tutorial with an assistant, where they weren't teaching them anything new, but what they were doing is providing support almost as an assistant to the guidance department, where that student was scheduled with that assistant on an every other day basis. I even had, back in the middle school years ago, we had students that were there every day, and it was to provide structure for that student. It was to provide, they were having difficulty, they were never completing their homework, they weren't getting projects done, things like that. So it was to help provide a little bit more structure for that student and get them organized and things like that. And we did see some success with it. I even, as recently as this year, we tried it at the high school, and we did have a lot of success with the student who was involved in it.
Thank you so much. Any other trustees? Mr. Haas, again, thank you so much for both presentations tonight. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Moving on to the consent agenda. Are there any items the board would like removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda? Not hearing any, can I have a motion to approve consent agenda items F, G, H, I, J, and K? Can I have a motion? Ms. Picataro, second. Who is it? Mr. Krug? Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Moving on to the regular agenda. Can I have a motion to review and adopt the New York State District-Wide School Safety Plan?
So moved.
Ms. Kane, second. Ms. Cerrone, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the Smart Schools Investment Plan? Ms. Pinataro, second. Ms. Kane, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Moving on to number 3. Can I have a motion to approve the MOU with the Bayport Fire Department? Ms. Pinataro, second. Ms. Kane, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Can I have a motion to review the first reading of policy 8131, pandemic planning, and 4526, computer network and internet acceptable use?
So moved.
Ms. Kane, second. Ms. Cerrone, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Can I have a motion to approve the clerk to destroy all voted ballots from the May 15th, 2018 budget vote and Board of Education election?
So moved.
Ms. Kane, second. Ms. Cerrone, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Can I have a motion to gratefully accept the cash donation and the budget to be amended for the 2023-2024 school year?
So moved.
Ms. Kane, second.
Second.
Ms. Pignataro, as always, we always appreciate any donations from Box Tops for Education for the Academy Street Elementary supply budget. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Can we have a motion to execute the Fourth Amendment to the April 4, 2017 employment with Dr. Harney, our Superintendent of Schools?
So moved.
Ms. Pignataro, second by Ms. Cerrone. I just want to say this is another amendment to Dr. Harney's contract. I think he knows, but it's always nice to hear how we feel about him, how this community feels about you. So we're extremely lucky and feel valued that you're a part of the school district. I know you will not be here forever, but unfortunately you won't be here forever. But we're hoping that you'll be here as long as possible. We truly value everything you've done for the school district, and we hope that you're going to change your retirement age to pretty late.
I just want to thank everyone for their support as always. I could not do this job without your support, and obviously the tremendous staff that I get the honor of working with every single day. So I thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Again, congrats, Dr. Harney. We're lucky to have you. Hopefully, there'll be many more of those amendments coming down the line, and you'll be here for many more years. Open it up to any community members for new business. Any trustees with any new business? Can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Krug, second. Ms. Cerrone, all in favor? Thank you guys so much. Have a great night. Appreciate it.